Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told session number 34. So we're moving right along.
We are.
Well, I say we're moving right along. We're still in the first few chapters of Exodus. So
For us, that's moving right along.
moving right along. We've missed a few weeks because of Missoula's Bible conference, and I've been traveling some and all sorts of things. So we've missed a few weeks. Today is August the 4th, 2021. We're still in our constant stream of mid to upper 90s, low 100s. And it looks like the 10-day forecast for here in Modesto, California is for more of the same. I don't see anything below 90. And but that's how life is here. But you've had a pretty hot summer, haven't you?
We have. My computer right now says 83. It's supposed to climb higher.
Okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to get higher today.
So I'm joined by Mike Maney in Missoula, Montana, and I'm Rick Howard in Modesto, California. We're both longtime friends, pastoring a couple of different churches, just using these sessions to share some things we've learned through the years and to kind of bounce them off of each other. We're mainly looking for Christ in the Old Testament. So we're not dealing with every detail of the stories. We're trying to see where there are types and shadows and prefigures of Christ, but not only of Christ, but of his people and of his promises, of his plan for his people. Anytime you talk about him, you have to talk about his creative work. That's how he manifests himself. And so we're not just limiting to Christ, but as you'll see today, we're talking about the people that he calls for special service, the nation that he's forming. And we're trying to get Moses back down to Egypt. We got him out of Egypt, but we're trying to get him back into Egypt. But we're not, as I said, we're not really trying to deal with all the details of the story. But here in chapter 3 of Exodus, he's keeping the flock, which is a really good idea of the Lord's training him to be a pastor of the nation of Israel. He had learned to be a bishop, an overseer, an administrator during his first 40 years.
Yeah.
But now he needs the important lessons of humility, of servanthood, of care for the flock, that the role of pastor displays. And that's his next 40 years. So we've got him at about 80 years old. God calls him to go back to Egypt to deliver them out of bondage. And all along, we're trying to look at some major principles that are involved in this whole story. So what God's really trying to do for Israel is he's taking them from being slaves all the way to being a bride. And that really explains a lot of the purpose of God in our lives. He delivers us from the bondage of our sins, but his end goal is to take us all the way to be part of the bride of Christ. And maybe to illustrate that, I know it's getting ahead a little bit because we really want to spend some time today on the name of God that he reveals himself to in chapter 3, and Mike has some good information on that. But to get us kind of just an overall view of God's purpose for them, let's look at Exodus 6, a few verses there. And God spoke to Moses in verse 2. And I would encourage all of you, when you're reading the Bible, if you come across a group of I wills, just underline them, circle them, note them, or something, because there are clusters all through the Old Testament of God saying, I will do this, I will do that. And here in this little passage, we have, I think, 7 of them, which is a good Bible number. Let's look at them real quick because it gives us a good setting for what we want to accomplish today. Chapter 6, verse 2, God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. Of course, most of you know that Lord in all capital letters is the personal name for God. Some say Jehovah, some say Yahweh, some say Yahuwah, and a variety of ways to pronounce it. One reason is because Hebrew had no vowels. They were primarily consonants, and they added vowel pointings at a later date. And so there are disagreements about exactly how the tetragrammaton should be spelt, but normally it's something like YHWH or YHVH or JHVH if you say Jehovah instead of Yahweh. But we all know this. It's thousands of times in the Old Testament, his personal name. So I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, which is El Shaddai, but by my name, Lord, Yahweh, I was not known to them. But he was, wasn't he? Maybe we'll talk about that. I mean, Yahweh was used all through Genesis, but it seems like God is, he was known by El Shaddai, of course, Elohim, and also Yahweh, but he wants to like reintroduce his people because he did reveal himself that way to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and even Joseph. But now they're coming out as a nation, and he wants the people as a whole to know him by his personal name, not just their forefathers, not just individuals, but to the whole nation. So the language is kind of confusing sometimes to people because they say, well, he was known to them, but to Israel, he's talking about as a nation. I was not known to them. I've also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan. And we always come back to the land as being a necessary part of it. He's wanting to marry them as a people, and he's wanting the land to be part of the marriage contract. That's why Isaiah talks about it as Beulah land, because that is a necessary part. The land of their pilgrimage in which they were strangers. I've also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage. So this idea of delivering them from bondage unto a marriage contract, which is revealed in detail in Exodus 19. I have remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord, Yahweh. Here's a start of at least 7 I wills. Number 1, I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. Number 2, I will rescue you from their bondage. Number 3, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. So the plagues he's talking about, his display of power is not just for the purpose of revealing himself as the only true God to the Egyptians, but also to reveal himself to his people Israel as Yahweh. And that's what he's talking about back in verse 3. And verse 7, I will take you as my people. Now we've elevated or moved forward into a marriage idea. So we talk a lot about Deuteronomy 6:23 principle. I brought you out that I might bring you in. And this is exactly what this passage is talking about. Verse 6, I will bring you out. And then verse 7, I will take you as my people. So the purpose of God for humans is not just to deliver from bondage and sin and the world and all that, but to take us to himself in a marriage contract. And the covenant covers all that. And I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into. So there's this into part, which he wants to, it is like a marriage gift, a wedding gift to his bride, is the land that they will live in fellowship with him. I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you, so that wedding gift, as a heritage. I am the Lord. So this little passage describes the comprehensive, or this overarching, this ultimate purpose of God for us. All the steps, you take all those I wills And you could basically say that is God's purpose for humans, his desire for humans.
In playing
is
off the
found
number
in these
7, you
five
could say it's a thorough or complete deliverance from A to Z. If you play off on the 7.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
complete. It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And then in chapter 7 and verse 3, he said, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. The reason I wanted to add that verse is that in order to accomplish all of the I wills, he has to gain power and authority, control over Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And Pharaoh's going to harden his heart. One man I heard one time describe this as the purpose of the plagues is that God was purposely picking a fight with Pharaoh. I like that idea. He's challenging Pharaoh. You say that your gods are the true gods.
Yeah.
The people you have in slavery claim that their God is the true God. I'm going to pick a fight with you and your gods, and let's see who comes out on the other side still standing.
Mount Carmel.
And
a precursor.
Elijah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's good. A precursor to Elijah and the prophets of Baal.
Yeah.
Jezebel there, and Ahab, of course, but Jezebel would be what we might call the Antichrist figure.
Yeah.
Here, Pharaoh is the Antichrist figure.
Yeah.
And so what we see in chapter 3 is that we have Genesis 3:15 being set up. Israel is the seed corporately of the woman. The Egyptians are the corporate seed of the serpent. Pharaoh is the head person, you might say, the Antichrist figure of that serpent seed. So all that's lacking in the Genesis 3:15 framework is the Messiah figure.
Mm-hmm.
And what chapter 3 is all about is God is putting that piece of the puzzle into place.
Yes.
So that when he has the Messiah figure in place, then Genesis 3:15 can be worked out for a victory for the seed of the woman.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But all along, leading up to it, it looked like the seed of the serpent was winning. So Pharaoh becomes this really Antichrist figure. And it's no accident. Again, I'm kind of jumping all over the place out of order and everything, but trying to set the stage to go back to chapter 3. It's no accident that when Moses and Aaron appear before Pharaoh in chapter 7, verses 8 through 13, is that the miracle that they performed involved a serpent. So that's why I'm saying it's a Genesis 3:15 outline being worked out here of the two leaders of each seed and the corporate members of each seed. And God starts off this picking a fight, you might say, or this battle between the two seeds involving a miracle with the serpent. And I just think it all fits together pretty well if you look at it, kind of overall like that. Of course, Pharaoh's wise men and sorcerers at first were able to duplicate that, but then Aaron's rod swallowed up their rod. So they had the ultimate victory. So this serpent idea being thrown into the middle to really kick it off, to me, is very interesting. And I think it does harken back to the Garden of Eden and the serpent, and that promises in Genesis 3:15 of how this is going to be continual, ongoing, repetitive, all through the history of the two seeds, and leadership figures within each seed will rise up to lead those two seeds and be representatives of the Christ figure and the Antichrist figure all the way through history.
Yeah. And in reaching forward, we see a similar use of the template of setting things up, that prior to Jesus' return, God will have put hooks in the jaws of the nations to bring them down to Armageddon and set things up for this climatic event, where he destroys them. And so he sets them up. And that word hardened, I had a note in my eSword program that the Hebrew word hardened means to strengthen. And what God was doing was playing off of his Pharaoh's character as being kind of a hardened type of individual. Of course, they were regarded as God, pharaohs were. And so thinking of himself like that, he's played off of that hardness that was already there and just intensified it. So he didn't.
And that's an important point, is
yeah, it is.
We get into discussions with the Calvinist type people and pharaohs when main examples used of God hardening his heart. And some places it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart, but if you overemphasize, I would say, or if you highlight only the part where God hardens Pharaoh's heart, in essence, you're saying that Pharaoh may have been a decent guy until God hardened his heart, or that Pharaoh on his own may not have taken this stand against God and his people.
Yeah.
So I like the idea that God simply brought out into the open what was already in Pharaoh's heart, the kind of person he was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And even when Pharaoh had lost several rounds in a 15-round bout, he was still stubborn enough to say, no, not today, And so he put his nation in worse shambles than the day before every time.
And so we realize we're on the right track by calling this a Genesis 3:15 event that's developing here. And it's no accident that God purposely recreates many of these types of plagues during the Great Tribulation leading up to the return of Christ, because it's the same principle of a seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, two leadership figures directing both of them, and the plagues for the purpose of the same thing, of showing who the true God is, who's really in charge. And God in the Great Tribulation is basically going to be picking a fight with the Antichrist. And it's going to cause the Antichrist to harden his heart and become more entrenched and more defiant. And those people who follow the Antichrist, it's going to reach a place where God's going to give them over to strong delusion that they should believe the lie. But again, God sends a strong delusion because they've already chosen the lie. Not that he forces them, down the path of the lie, but he's given them over to what they've already chosen. I think that's what we're seeing with Pharaoh.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
And
then in the celestial realm, Michael will pick a fight with Lucifer. So,
yes.
So those two in the atmosphere above us are going to duke it out. And so there's just this war, is good versus evil, just being carried out on different levels.
And in both cases, whether we're talking about Exodus in Egypt with the plagues, or whether we're talking about the book of Revelation and the plagues that are poured out there, in both cases, it is a fight to the death. There'll only be one standing when it's all over. And the result's going to be the same in both cases. That Yahweh, the true God, and his messenger, his representative of the seed of the woman, his son Christ, will be the ultimate victor.
Well, I'm reminded of that scene in one of the Karate Kid movies where Miyagi told Daniel, he said he realized what was shaping up, and he told Daniel, he said, Daniel-san, this no tournament, this for real. So we've been in
all of this in an overall sense, these this whole idea of God delivering them from bondage for the purpose of taking them as his bride. And we've already looked at those I wills in chapter 6, but back in chapter 3, to try to get to where we really want to get to today, is I want to read a similar thought in verse 8, Exodus 3:8. So I have come down, and I have that underlined in my Bible because that's such a great picture of Christ.
Yeah.
He came down. He
Came
who
down.
came down, one of the Gospels says. Of course, Philippians 2 talks about that in detail. I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. That first statement there in Exodus 3:8 is a description of the four gospel books, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And not only to deliver them out, but to bring them up. So he came down to bring us up. I mean, the gospel is all the way through the Bible.
Yeah.
Picture of what Christ came to accomplish is all the way through the Bible. He's showing it here with the Moses figure, the Pharaoh figure, and the two groups of people. And to bring them up from that land to, so bringing us up to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, meaning that which the wicked people thought they owned and controlled, he's going to give it to his people.
Yeah.
He's going to overthrow the wicked.
Yes.
So Exodus 3:8 is a wonderful description of both comings of Christ and what he intends to accomplish in both comings.
Can you
And it's
imagine
right there? It just jumps off the page at you, doesn't it?
It does. And can you imagine the looks on the faces of those two disciples on the road to Emmaus when Jesus got to this part? You know, how many times as Jews had they read this, you know, and there he was, the one who had come down.
Yeah, did he quote Exodus 3:8, say, that's me right there?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's me. And that's what I'm here for now.
Yeah.
And all of it is based on two, you might say, bookend statements in 3:7. For I know their sorrows. So, you know, he was a man of sorrows, taking on our grief, our sins, our need. And so he saw our sorrows and he became a man of sorrows. So he came down because of the need. And his goal is to bring us up, give us a land. And then verse 9, the other bookend, now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. I've also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh. And in essence, the Father sent the Son the first time, and in essence, the Father is going to send the Son the second time.
Yeah.
And that's why Jesus, in his human form on earth before his resurrection and glorified body, could say, not even the Son knows the day or the hour. But whenever the Father tells me to go back, that's when I go back. You know, the picture of perfect submission and humility. And so that's why Moses is such a good type of Christ in this. And Moses had learned the lesson of humility and submission, being a pastor figure, keeping the flock in verse 11. Now Moses says, who am I? See, at the end of the first 40 years, is almost as if Moses was saying, I am he. I am the, you know, he supposed that they should have known that he was he was the deliverer. So at first he says, I am he, and now he says, who am I? See, this is the lesson you need to learn the next 40 years.
Yeah.
And what a change. You know, he's a better man in chapter 3, verse 11, than he was back in chapter 2, when he tried to become a prince and a judge over them in his own method, in his own time.
You know, the principle, we see the principle just consistent with Saul of Tarsus, who really thought he was somebody, needed to find out that with God, he wasn't as great as he thought. So God had to rename him to a name that meant small. You know, so Saul had to figure out who he was in the eyes of God, not in the eyes of himself. So another thing I was going to point out too is, you already read this, that God was in all of this. The underlying principle shows God's character and that he was remembering his covenant. And that shows the power or force of a covenant once it's been made, that God will do everything in his power to fulfill, bring that covenant and those promises to pass. And so even though 400 years have gone by, he never forgot the power and strength of his word in that covenant. It's just now time to do business.
Yeah, so in Genesis 15, when Abraham was in a deep sleep and God passed through that burning torch and oven and passed through that sacrifice, basically saying, if I don't fulfill this covenant, I want to kill myself. I deserve to be a God who's dead.
Yeah.
I'm laying my own self on the line by making this promise. And that's what he's doing here. When it says, I remember my covenant, or God remembered his covenant, he, in these plagues and in promising to deliver Israel from Egypt, he's again saying the same thing. Either the gods of Egypt are defeated or I'm defeated.
Yeah.
And I'm laying myself on the line again. And when this is all over, it will not be me who's dead.
Yeah. I'll either be a man of my word, or I'll be as lifeless as these animals that are lying there, who have no breath.
Let me ask you a question, Mike.
Yeah.
I shouldn't do these without maybe warning you ahead of time.
Uh-oh.
So before we get into the whole I am who I am and the meaning of the name and everything. So when he comes down to Midian and he meets this priest of Midian, verse 16 of chapter 2, and then verse 18, his name is Ruel. And then we find in chapter 3, verse 1, his name is Jethro. So have you ever looked into why the two different names and what the reason is behind it?
No, I haven't. I really haven't. Oftentimes people did have two names.
Real common in the Bible to have two names.
Real common.
Often one of the names would be more of a title. That's what I'm thinking about Ruel. It means, anytime there's El, there's something about God.
Yeah.
And he's called a priest of Midian, and Ruel means a friend of God. So, these were distant relatives through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I wonder how much knowledge of the true God they had. And it's Ruel because he's a friend of whatever God of the Midianites were, or is he a friend of the true God? Because El doesn't necessarily have to mean the true God, just means God.
The power.
Yeah. So Ruel may be more of a title, Jethro, in connection with being a priest of Midian. So more of a spiritual idea behind what his role is. And then Jethro may be his personal name. Some have said that Ruel may have died, because when Moses comes down there, he's only 40. And by the time we get to chapter 3, Moses is 80. So 40 years have passed. So maybe some have said that Ruel, who was actually his father-in-law, had died, and that Jethro, who's called his father-in-law, but in the Bible, father or son can just mean a relative, is actually his brother-in-law, who took over as head of the family. And but there's no way to prove it either way. If Jethro and Ruel are the same person, then Moses is now 80, and his father-in-law naturally would be probably at least 20 to 30, 40 years older. So Jethro would be 100 or over now. So that's why some have conjectured that his actual father-in-law had already died, and now this Jethro is the family father figure, maybe one of maybe the oldest son of Ruel.
Mhm.
So I didn't know if you'd ever, I've looked into it some, and but
Uh-huh.
like so many things, it's inconclusive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just could be maybe several different things. Maybe one of our listeners will have the answer, and they'll put a note up there saying, "You knuckleheads, the answer is easy, and here it is."
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I guess maybe stands out to me is that he's associated with, as a priest.
Mhm.
And of course, he wasn't in line with the priesthood that God would eventually have set up, because I hadn't started yet through Aaron. And so it would appear that this priesthood set up by themselves was not in line or in keeping with any priesthood that God would ordain or would sanction.
Mhm.
And of course, we have false priesthoods today.
So he's tending sheep for 40 years. He's learning important spiritual lessons that he had not learned his first 40 years. And so 80 years of preparation for 40 years of actual special calling and fulfilling of that calling.
Mhm.
So he's being commissioned in verse 10, I will send you. So anytime God talks about sending someone, that's an official commission,
Yeah.
representing God as an ambassador.
Yeah.
That's why we say in the Great Commission it was given to the church, that is our commission, our official ambassadorship role,
Yes.
representing God to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians, to the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. And we are to bring, under our commission, bring people out from bondage, from Pharaoh's bondage, and bring them to the mountain, bring them to bridal relationship. That's how you started out, from bondage to bridal relationship.
Exactly. So in this sense, in verse 10, he's kind of becomes the Messiah figure.
Yeah.
One sent. In the Gospel of John talks a lot about that. So he sees this bush burning and it's not consumed. And I've said this before, but I love that little statement in verse 3, chapter 3. Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight. And as soon as he said, I will now turn aside, there was no turning back. It was life changing. Maybe he didn't know it at the time, but that little decision changed the course of the rest of his life. And a lot of times we don't know, God puts things in our life. We're not always in close fellowship with him. We're not always in tune with spirit leadership. We're not always sensitive to what the spirit is trying to tell us. So sometimes God purposely places something in our path that causes us to turn aside. We take notice of it and we turn aside because we're just not, otherwise we're just not maybe in touch with God enough for that still small voice. Sometimes we need a burning bush. Yeah.
And of course, he doesn't work with us now as concretely, I'll use the word concretely, or with visually as a burning bush. I mean, he communicates with us more, in a more subtle fashion through his spirit. So it doesn't, we're just in a different era where we just don't have those types of visible signs like they had. But by the same token, we have the Holy Spirit to lead us.
So Moses starts this little fuss with God of trying to get out of this special calling. And God's not about to let him get out of it. God makes an allowance by bringing Aaron into it. But all that God says in verse 12 is when Moses said, who am I? All that God would say at this point is, I will certainly be with you. So that's really is that's the single thing God says all the way through the Bible. Like when Joshua, with others, when anyone tries to get out of it or put up a fuss or question God's calling in their life, and give me a sign or help me or whatever, God's main answer is always, I will be with you. That's really all you need to know. Sometimes he gives extra help, but the fact that he promises, that's when he commissioned the church, that's what he said, I will be with you until the end of the age.
I'd like to read
So he
something
said the
from
same thing.
I'd like to read something from my grandson Samuel, who brought the Sunday devotional. I got his notes. I asked him for his notes, and this 12-year-old boy, listen to what he said. His text was Psalm 50, 1-6. And he said, God always knows what's right for us in our situations. He makes the right decisions, even if we may be thinking, God, what are you doing? He knows what's right for us when we don't. We just have to trust the process. God has brought us all this far, and we have no reason to think he's going to let us down now. He knows what we can handle and can't handle. And as we know, he will never put us through something we cannot overcome. Trust is a delicate thing, difficult to earn and easy to break. There will be challenges in our lives, but we have every reason to trust God because he has never and has never and will never let us down. That's my 12-year-old grandson.
That's
Trust
really
the
good
process.
insight from a 12-year-old. Yeah, that is wonderful.
Yeah,
What a blessing for Grandpa to have heard that, huh?
yeah, yeah. I bum rushed him up to the pulpit and said, I want your notes. So, but yeah, trust the process. That's what Moses was called upon. He didn't know the future, but you're right. He had to first trust the process by turning aside. Here's your first.
That's
Yeah.
great. Sam,
Yeah,
tell Samuel I really appreciated hearing that. So he sees this burning bush and he turns aside and God calls out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Here I am.
here I am.
You know, what's that old saying? God is less concerned about our ability than our availability.
Availability, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So
Yeah.
he's much more satisfied with an attitude, a mindset
Yeah.
of here I am.
Yeah.
Rather than here's what I have to offer you, God.
Yeah.
My abilities.
Yeah.
God's not impressed with our abilities,
No.
but he is impressed with our availability,
Yeah.
with our willingness.
Yeah.
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 And the famous statement, do not draw near this place, take your sandals off your feet. The place where you stand is holy ground. It basically became a temple setting. In essence, this burning bush and the area around it became in the presence of God setting, so kind of a temple. He's going to make Moses a prophet figure, a priest figure, even though Aaron ultimately carried out that role, and kind of a king figure as well. He was their leader. He was in essence kind of a king figure. So as a type of Christ, Moses, in some ways, and not perfectly, but in some ways filled all three of those key anointed roles that later were separated into different people. But that's what he's trying to do with Moses. Let him know it's holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God, which is the proper response when we come into the presence of God.
Yeah.
Is his holiness. His holiness, his primary attribute, isn't it? Of all the things we'd say about God, I don't know that the heart of his attributes is, I think, found in the word, he is holy.
I totally agree. In fact, that's how Jesus started out teaching them how to address God. They have to understand who it is they're about to speak to. And so my lesson tonight, I'm filling in for Philip. He's out of town. And my lesson tonight will be a PowerPoint, and it's called Holy. And we look at the Hebrew word, and then we look at just where the holiness, this concept of holiness begins with God. Then, of course, it flows through his son, quite obviously. If God is holy, his son would be holy. Then, of course, all that is supposed to then transfer over onto his people.
Mhm. Good.
And so yeah, I don't know if
Especially where when it, go ahead.
I may have sent it to you. I don't know. It's one that I made years ago. So I'll be bringing
I
that tonight.
probably have it in my very thick, so to speak, computer folder
Uh-huh.
called Mike Maney's folder,
Uh-huh.
where I just throw everything you send me in there.
Now, when you say so to speak and you use the word thick, what does that mean?
Well, if it was an actual folder in my hands, it would be very thick.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know that you can use that term regarding computer folders.
Well, I was applying that
If I
term.
open that folder, there are many titles in there, let's say, many documents.
Yeah. I was applying it to the name of the folder being thick.
Oh, no, not at all. I meant many multiple documents.
Sure you did.
Did I cover that okay? Did I cover my
I
tracks?
think you did. I think you did. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. And that's what he wanted them to know, that the gods of Egypt were not holy. They were contrived. They were fabricated according to men's own devices. But God, in his lofty position, was distinct, was unique, was separate, was holy above all things.
And so when you think of the holiness of God, it really refers to the two sides of the same coin, and like Romans 11 talks about, consider both the goodness and the severity of God. So
yes,
the holiness of God regarding, in this story, regarding Pharaoh and the Egyptians is a severity. Regarding Israel, it's his goodness, his mercy.
Yeah.
So it takes both parts to make up the holiness of God.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what many so-called Christian churches and preachers today, it's not that God is not love, it's not that God is not merciful and kind and forgiving, but if a church or a minister only focuses on that and not on the severity, the judgment, the wrath of God, his hatred of sin, then how do you really understand the price that Christ paid on the cross? If you're only dwelling on the enjoyable side of God's love and mercy and kindness.
Right.
But why did Christ have to die? Because of God's wrath of sin and because of his severity against our depravity and our stubborn pride and our resistance of trusting him. So you have to include both parts, and we see both parts regarding this story: the goodness of God and the severity of God. So Mike said he had some thoughts, and I've been trying to get to this part this whole session. But when God told Moses in verse 12, "This shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." And so that's Exodus 19, Mount Sinai. Came back to the same mountain where God delivered to him the 10 Commandments and all the law, and entered into a marriage contract officially with them there, being a little over 2 months out of Egypt, actually probably what later became the day of Pentecost. That event on Mount Sinai. And so just a short time, but he's got to get them out of Egypt first. He has to get them across the Red Sea, and he has to get them back to this mountain. And this is the single sign he gives. When you come back to this mountain and you worship me here, you'll know. But he gave a whole lot of evidence leading up to that with the plagues, with the Red Sea event, and with the giving them of water and manna. He had already shown great evidence that he was taking care of them, but really the main sign is when you get back here, you'll be fully convinced. So Moses said to God, "Indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them?" Because all the Egyptian gods had names, didn't they? And so Israel in Egypt had not really, they'd probably been taught it, they'd probably discussed it, to some degree, but they're so busy at this point being slaves.
Yeah.
This idea of a personal understanding of a personal God with a personal name was somewhat removed from them. And so God was trying to reintroduce that idea that he had started with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of my personal name. God said to Moses, I am who I am. So there it is. That tetragrammaton, that personal name of God, that and Mike has some things he's looked into about that. So if you're ready, Mike, just start sharing with us what you've come up with.
Well, you've set this up very beautifully. As we picture Moses on that mount, that burning bush, engaging in this conversation. Moses really did want, and as preachers, we understand we want to be somewhat ready when we stand before a people with a message. We want to have kind of our I's dotted and our T's crossed. And so I think that's what Moses was kind of looking to. And so I gathered some information, different sources, and one source has framed it this way, and I really like it because I have some other scriptures that will tie into this. And we've already talked about it. You said that God wanted Moses to understand that he was holy or unique and distinct from all other deities that Moses was already aware of in Egypt. And so this one writer says that the root of the YHWH word translated as Lord, he says the root of it literally means to breathe. And I like that because then he goes on to explain that to the ancient Hebrews, only that which can be perceived through the senses, sight, feeling, hearing, smell, or taste, is believed to exist. And so in order to breathe or exist, they understand that these five senses are involved. So he goes on to say, this is why the ancients usually erected statues of a god, something they could see. Okay? When Moses asked God, who should I tell them has sent me? God said, tell them, and then he uses the Hebrew equivalency in English, Eya Asher Eya has sent you. He says, while this phrase is commonly translated as I am who I am, he says, in his opinion, it's better understood as I breathe and have breath. In the Hebrew mind, that which exists has breath. This can be a god, man, animal, or even a mountain. The breath, often translated as spirit, is the character of an individual or object. God may not be seen, but he is breath and does exist. And so when each of these components are combined, the name means my God is Yah. The word El means power or authority, and the tetragrammaton means to have breath. So in his opinion, the overall meaning or sense of it was, you tell Pharaoh, my authority is the one who has breath. Okay? So now we couple that with some passages in the Bible that talk about breath or breathing. And we're first drawn to Genesis, where the Lord God formed the man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And so the source of that breath, of course, was God. Okay, so in that one verse alone, it clearly shows that God breathes and has breath. Okay, and then in Ezekiel 37:5, thus saith the Lord God unto these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. So breath equates life, okay, or existence. And so another verse that talks about God's breath, 2 Samuel 22:16, And the channels of the sea appeared. The foundations of the world were discovered at the rebuking of the Lord, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils. So again, the Bible presents Yahweh as the one who breathes and has breath. As opposed to Yahweh are all the idols of the nations. And so God was about to commission Moses to go back into a hornet's nest of all these idols and to declare to them that his power, his authority, by which he preached and spoke, was the true God, the one who had breath, who breathed and had breath. And so Habakkuk says, 2:19, woe unto him that saith to the wood, awake, to the dumb stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. So he points out the fact that these idols do not live, they don't have breath. Okay. Psalm 115, 4-9. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet have they, but they walk not. Neither speak they through their throat. They that make them are like unto them. So is everyone that trusteth in them. O Israel, trust thou in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. So basically, Israel, you are trusting in idols who have no breath, who cannot breathe. I am the one, trust in Yahweh. I am the one who has breath. I am the one who breathes. Okay. And so in the New Testament, we see how Jesus said that the Pharisees were as blind guides leading the blind. And so what had happened to Israel over the course of time was Jeremiah 5:21. Hear now this, O foolish people, and without understanding, which have eyes and see not, which have ears and hear not. And so as Israel were following these idols, they put themselves, who didn't have eyes, who didn't have ears, as they followed them, they themselves took on the same qualities of those gods. They stopped hearing, they stopped seeing the mighty breath and power of God, their covenant God. And so I like the idea that he develops here that life and breath are synonymous. And so Moses, you go back and tell them that the one who breathes, as opposed to all their idols who have no breath, the one who breathes and has breath, that's the one that you are preaching it by his power. And so I like the way that's framed out.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mike. It's, even in the simple pronunciation of it, because you listen to people in the Middle East pronounce words, like they're clearing their throat half the time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the
I'm
guttural.
afraid to stand in front of, very guttural.
Yeah.
So if you listen to them, even just let's take Yahweh for example. So we say it, in a Western way, Yahweh.
Yeah.
But if you hear them say it, it's like Yahweh. It's like lots of breath coming out.
A lot of breath.
Throat.
Yeah.
So even the letters of the Tetragrammaton said properly require a heavy breath. And just in the pronunciation of it, it has the idea of breath. And of course, the closest tie-in that you mentioned for someone like Moses and the children of Israel would be the creation when he breathed into Adam, as you said. And so God as creator, God as the source.
Yeah.
And then compared to idols, they can't breathe. So the gods of Egypt, through each plague, because he said, against all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgment. So each of the plagues were directed at a different god of Egypt, and none of those gods were able to answer. Because they were lifeless.
Yeah.
So I like how you explained all that. And God's showing toward each of their primary gods, able to stand against me.
Yeah. And this goes back to the holiness, the uniqueness, the only one, He just wanted to know, look, I'm the only one. I'm your God. The nations don't have me as their God. You are the only one. Just appreciate who I am and what I want to do for you. I want to take you to the mountain, people. Just trust the process.
And his name is said to be, people try to interpret it different ways. I remember Brother Ward talking about this, said it was a future perfect, I think he called it.
Mm.
So he interpreted this as he who will be,
Yeah.
meaning he's constant.
Yeah.
I'm God, I change not idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's really kind of timeless, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on the verbs, the to be verb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in English, it's I am, you are,
Mm-hmm.
he, she, it is. But you
Mhm.
start taking apart all the forms of the to be verb, and it's the most important basic verb of all.
Yeah.
So the fact that God's name is based on
Mm-hmm.
this key verb also adds to the idea of breath,
Mhm.
that God is active. He's
Mhm.
verbal.
Yeah.
He's a verb, not just a noun.
Yeah.
He's always active. He's always creating. He's
Yeah.
always saving. He's always delivering. He's always judging. He's always
Yeah.
pouring out his wrath or whatever. But he's just a very active God. He's not.
Yeah.
He's not idle. Like you mentioned, the prophets of Baal
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
Elijah mocking them. Maybe
Yeah.
he's asleep. Maybe he's gone on. Maybe he's gone on a far journey.
Right. Yeah.
But God is a God who is am. In Revelation, the New Testament, it's kind of described as he who was, he who is, and he who
Yeah.
shall be.
And how many times is he referred to as the true
description
and,
of yes,
the true and living God?
So,
He's referred to as the true and living God.
so he's a transcendent God in the
Mhm.
sense that he's not like us. He's so far above us.
Mhm.
But in the person of Jesus, he also showed that he desires to be close to us. He desires to be. So yes, he is so far above us that he's transcendent, but he wants to be close to us, even to the point of developing with these people a marriage idea.
Mhm.
So it's just a wonderful God. You've been kind of almost going out on me,
And you
freezing up.
and you on my end. So I
Yeah, a little
haven't
bit
stopped
spotty,
it yet.
a little
Yeah.
bit in your voice and a little bit in the visual.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid we're getting ready to maybe be kicked off by
Yeah.
our computers.
Yeah.
So maybe we've been at this right at an hour. Maybe this is a good
Yeah.
place to stop talking about the name of God
Yeah.
before we lose it, and you have to figure out how to link the two sessions.
Oh no.
But we'll get on top of these
Yeah.
computer issues eventually.
Yeah. And then back to
Thanks for sharing that, Mike. That was good.
Yeah, you bet. So you're ready to stop it now? Then we'll just converse offline.
Yeah, because it seemed to the last 5 minutes, it seems to have picked up steam a little bit. I'm just
Yeah.
afraid. In fact, a couple of times I thought you were froze up, but it
Yeah.
was only for like a second or two, and then you came back.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that will show itself on the final product.
Yeah.
It'll probably be a little bit jumpy when people
Yeah.
watch it,
Yeah.
but not too bad.
So to our viewers,
They will forgive us. We're old and we're
Yeah.
untrained in the ways of technology, and
Yeah.
so people will have mercy on us.
Yeah. I really think it's my connection. So folks at
Think
home,
so?
I think it might be my connection on my end.
Well, I'll let you take the blame.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop. I'll stop the recording, and then I'll talk to you offline.